Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Alex McHenry, and I am with Community Resource Center. We're a statewide nonprofit that is part of the Count Me In initiative. And today we are bringing you a presentation through Count Me In on this year's statewide ballot measures. So there's two ballot measures we'll be talking about today, as well as just how those ballot measures get on the ballot and kind of the importance of voting down your ballot. And then we will be hearing from some folks at the Education Foundation of Eagle County on two very important school district initiatives in Eagle County. So thank you so much for listening and watching this webinar to ensure that you can be informed when you go to vote in this November's election. So first, just a little bit about Count Me In. This is a collaborative effort among several different nonprofits, which include the Colorado Fiscal Institute, Community Resource Center, where I'm from, Colorado Common Cause, Great Education Colorado, and Small Business Majority, as well as some rockstar volunteers. And this group of organizations really came together around a set of shared values to create a better Colorado, and really believe that it's our choices we make as voters that sort of shape our public investments here in Colorado and create the lives we know here in Colorado. We also believe that the best decision makers are informed and educated. And so our goal is to ensure that all Colorado voters are informed about the issues they're voting on and can make choices that best align with their values. We do not take stances on the ballot measures that we talk about, but rather just want to provide clear, easy to understand, objective overviews of those measures. Because, like I was saying, we believe that these decisions we make on our ballot are what help to create thriving communities here in Colorado. Everything from safety to outdoor spaces to our library districts, our school districts, all of these places where we go to work and to play. We believe that it is those choices we make as voters that shape our communities. And just want to jog your memory, if you have voted in Colorado in some of our past elections, we as voters have already made a lot of important decisions that do shape our lives here in Colorado. So I'll go through just a couple of those. We were the first state to legalize marijuana, as many of you know. We have passed ballot initiatives to raise our minimum wage here in Colorado. We have passed initiatives to change the way in which we amend our state constitution, change the way that we do our redistricting process here in Colorado. We have said we want to collect money from our lottery to go towards preserving outdoor spaces through Great Outdoors Colorado. And recently, we also passed the Paid Family Medical Leave Act. So a lot of these decisions that, again, have been voted on by Colorado voters. And so we are directly have that opportunity to shape what our lives look like here in Colorado. And just to recap kind of how decisions are made in our state, how new laws are created, how our Constitution is amended, there are sort of two pathways to decision making. And the first is through the legislative process. So our elected state legislatures meet during the legislative session each year, which runs roughly from January through May. And during that legislative session, they can introduce bills, pass new laws, and sometimes also pass decisions on to voters. So the second decision-making pathway is through the ballot. And that is where we as voters really hold that responsibility to get to make decisions about what we want our communities to look like here in Colorado. And there are a couple of different ways that ballot measures can make it onto the ballot. And so I'm going to go over this briefly because actually the two statewide ballot measures that we'll see this year are similar in how they made it to the ballot. But we can see referred measures, which means that these are measures that were kind of designed during the legislative process and are being referred to the ballot by our elected officials to go to a vote of the people. You will know that a measure was a referred measure because it will appear as a lettered measure on your ballot. So, for example, this year we see propositions HH and proposition II. So we know that both of these were referred through the legislature. If a measure came through the citizen-initiated process, it would appear as a number. So here in Colorado, we can also have citizens work to put issues on the ballot by going through a process to certify the language of those measures and then collecting a certain number of signatures to get those measures put on the ballot for a vote. And again, those measures would appear as numbers on your ballot, but we do not have any citizen-initiated measures this year. And so just to reiterate, we really think that our communities are affected by the decisions we make as voters. And so we really want people to take their vote seriously, to do their research and be informed on the measures you're voting on, and understand that maybe if you don't see a direct impact of the measure on you personally, know that your vote and the decision you make will impact your communities at large. And so really thinking about those collective resources that we all have access to and how they are impacted by our decisions. And so a couple years ago, the Count Me In group came up with a little bit of a decision-making matrix just to help people interrogate the ballot measures that they are voting on. And we came up with some questions you can kind of ask yourself or do some research on to better understand the measures you're voting on and how they might impact you personally, your family, and the community at large. And the first question is really to ask yourself, does the ballot measure include tax language? This is important because we do vote on a lot of tax measures here in Colorado. Both of the measures we'll be voting on this year include tax language, and these can sometimes be a little bit more complicated to understand and require us to ask some additional questions to better understand how the measure will impact our communities. And so the next question you can ask is, what type of tax does the measure include? There are three main types of sales tax, or three main types of tax here in Colorado. The first is sales tax, income tax, and then property tax. And so understanding what type of tax we're talking about can help you better understand who that tax increase or tax decrease might impact the most, depending on if folks own a home, if they earn income here in Colorado. And if it's a sales tax, that often has a larger impact on lower income earners who spend a higher percentage of their income on goods that are taxed. So the next question to ask yourself is, does this measure help to increase or decrease revenue? So we have, does it increase revenue or does it decrease revenue? This is important because while an individual tax might not impact you directly, maybe say you don't own a home and there's a tax measure about property taxes, so you don't see a direct impact on you. Understanding if the tax measure overall is going to increase or decrease revenue will impact your community, right? Because that revenue that the state is collecting is going to pay for a lot of those collective services that I mentioned, like our fire districts, our school districts, our roads, transportation, things like that. And so even though the tax might not directly impact you, it's important to think about what services that you access might be impacted by this measure. And then lastly, just to think about what does this measure do for things you care about in your community? So again, at Count Me In, we really encourage folks to think about their values and want folks to make decisions and be informed and be able to vote in alignment with their values. So thinking about what things you care most about, what you want to see continue on into the future, and how does this measure play into that? So now that we know how important it is to be informed and to vote all the way down our ballot, how much our decisions can impact our way of life here in Colorado, let's talk about the two statewide measures you're going to see on your ballot this November. And I know ballots have already been mailed out. Many of you likely have your ballot with you. So we're going to walk through these two measures that you're seeing on your ballot: Proposition HH and Proposition II. And we're going to start with Proposition HH. There's a lot of components to this measure, but we're going to try and break it down to be as easy to understand as possible. So this slide provides sort of a summary of what the measure does. The first main thing that Proposition HH would do is work to decrease property taxes for homeowners and businesses over the next 10 years. And I'll walk through exactly how it would work to decrease property taxes. The second piece of this measure is that it would increase the state's revenue cap. And we'll talk more about what that revenue cap is and the implications of this. But essentially, by allowing the state to retain more tax revenue, the state would then be able to use that funding for schools, to backfill funding to local districts that might lose funding due to the property tax reduction, as well as provide some funding for rental assistance programs. And the last kind of component of Proposition HH is that it would create identical Tabor rebate checks for tax year 2023. So when folks go to file their taxes early next year, all taxpayers would receive the same amount as a Tabor rebate check, rather than that amount being based off of your income. And I'll talk more about that and show specifically what those checks would look like later on. So first, let's talk about how we would decrease property taxes through HH. And to do this, you first need to understand how property taxes are calculated in the first place. So this slide is showing how property taxes are calculated. We have this equation, which takes your property value or the market value of your home. That is then multiplied by what is called the assessment rate. And that rate is set by the state and is different for different categories, like residential properties versus commercial. That's set by the rate, by the state. And then that amount is multiplied by your mills or your mill levy. And that gets the total. The mills are set at the local level. Often those funds are going to your local districts, so they can be increased to, do additional renovations in your library district or something like that. And then you get your total amount owed in property taxes. So you can see at the bottom of the screen an example of a $550,000 home multiplied by our current assessment rate, which is 6.95 for residential properties, and then multiplied by, say, 90 mills for that district. That will vary depending on what district the home is in. And you can see that that homeowner might owe $3,440 in property taxes. So what would HH do if passed, right? We said it would help to reduce property taxes, but how would it go about doing that? And there are a couple different mechanisms. The first is if HH passes, it would reduce the assessment rates for homes and businesses. And I'll show that amount on the next slide. The second thing HH would do is allow homeowners to exempt a portion of the property value from taxation before applying the assessment rate. The third thing it would do is it would cap the growth of property tax collections for local governments. So this might incentivize local governments to keep that mill levy number lower or lower them from what they are currently. It's important to note that that cap would not apply to school districts or home rule districts. The fourth thing that Proposition HH would do is related to what is called our senior homestead exemption, which allows homeowners who are over the age of 65 who have lived in their home for at least 10 years to claim some property tax reduction and subtract a value from that total market value of their home. If HH passes, it would allow folks who are currently claiming the senior homestead exemption and then move to still claim that exemption, even if they've moved into a new home or downsized. It would also allow those who have maybe recently moved but had previously been eligible for this exemption to reclaim that exemption. So a little bit of property tax relief to senior homeowners. So let's look at the assessment rates. Here it shows the current assessment rate, which you can see for residential properties is 6.765. If Proposition HH passed, it would reduce that assessment rate slightly to 6.7%. The key thing to understand here is that the assessment rate is projected to increase over the next couple of years and go to 7.15 by 2025. So if HH passed, homeowners would see more kind of property tax savings in future years, since that number is projected to go up, but HH would move it down to 6.7 and then hold it there for the next 10 years. The other key way in which HH would reduce property taxes is through allowing homeowners to exempt a portion of their market value of their home. So under current law, this year, homeowners would be allowed to exempt $15,000 from the total value of their home. If Proposition HH passed, that would increase to $50,000 for this year. And then it would be $40,000 that they could exempt moving forward. And under current law, that amount will go to zero in future years. So you can see down at the bottom, again, an example home that costs $550,000. That homeowner might expect to see some savings in the realm of $171 this year, but that amount would increase significantly in future years due to the way that the measure works. Also important to note that the amount a homeowner would save through this property tax relief will be different for every homeowner, depending on the district they live in, whether or not that district decides to move their mills down, the total market value of their home. There's a lot of variables that go into this. And so here is just one example that shows kind of under current law, we can see the $560,000 home with that current assessment rate, and say the mills in that district are 75 mills. They might see a property tax of $2,931. If HH were to pass, we see they're allowed to then take $40,000 off of that home. The assessment rate would be 6.7%. And we might see the district decide to lower their mills in order to remain under that local property tax cap that would be put on through Proposition HH. So you can see there that that homeowner might save around close to $500 in property taxes. Again, this is just a scenario showing what might happen, and this is for tax year 2024. All right, so we know that Proposition HH is going to work through these different mechanisms to try and decrease property taxes or lower the amount of property taxes owed. The other key part of Proposition HH, as I mentioned, is that it would increase the state's revenue cap. And so due to TABOR, which is our Taxpayer Bill of Rights, the state of Colorado has a revenue cap, which the state is allowed to bring in tax revenue each year. And that cap does increase each year based off population growth and inflation. And any tax revenue that is brought in above that cap must be refunded to taxpayers. And currently that is refunded through a variety of different mechanisms, but many taxpayers do remember that last year, taxpayers received a check for $750. That was our TABOR rebate check last year. So that was money that the state had brought in above the cap that they were refunding to taxpayers. So if Proposition HH passed, that revenue cap would increase by an additional 1% each year for the next 10 years. So the blue line on this graph shows kind of our current cap, and that purple line shows how we would expect that cap to increase by the additional 1% each year over the next 10 years. That additional revenue that the state would be allowed to retain would go to help backfill some of the local districts that will potentially lose revenue due to the decrease in property taxes. And then a significant amount of that retained revenue would go to funding schools, some going into our state education fund, and some money would go to rental assistance programs. And so those amounts would sort of vary year to year, obviously would be dependent on the amount of revenue over the cap that the state brings in. And any revenue that's above the new cap would still be refunded to taxpayers, sometimes in the form of TABOR rebate checks. Which brings us to the last piece that I talked about on Proposition HH, which is that if HH passes, there is put in place for just this next tax year only. So for 2023 tax year, when folks file their taxes early next year, all taxpayers would receive the same amount as a TABOR rebate check. And that is estimated to be around $898 per taxpayer. It's important to note that currently the way that the TABOR rebate checks are administered is based off of your adjusted gross income. So you can see on this chart the different levels of income on the left. And then if you look under that current law, that shows how much taxpayers might expect to receive in a TABOR rebate check. So we see smaller checks for our lower income earners and much larger checks for higher income earners. If Proposition HH passed, all taxpayers, regardless of their income level, would expect to receive a check in the realm of $898. That is just for tax year 2023. After that, even if HH passes, the TABOR rebate mechanism for redistributing those funds would go back to the current law. Okay, so that was a lot of information about HH. Just want to do a quick recap of what a yes and no vote mean. So a yes on Proposition HH says, yes, I am voting to decrease property taxes for homeowners and businesses for the next 10 years and allowing the state to retain that additional 1% of revenue surplus. So additional 1% above what the current cap would be. A no vote on HH says, let's keep the property taxes at their current rates and what they're projected to be in the next couple of years and not increase the state revenue cap at all. All right, so now I'm just going to move on to the next proposition that you'll see on your ballot, which is Proposition II. This one is much easier to understand. And so I'm just going to go through kind of some of the background of why it's on the ballot in the first place, and then help you understand what your vote means. This proposition actually came from a proposition that voters passed in 2020, which was Proposition EE. And that proposition increased taxes on cigarettes and nicotine and tobacco products, and had a new tax on nicotine products. And this was unanimously approved by voters. So voters approved Proposition EE to increase the sales tax on these products. And as part of that ballot language and the language that was in the Blue Book in 2020, they were required to give projections of the amount of revenue that would be brought in through this these new sales tax over the first year. And the projected amount ended up being lower than what was actually brought in. So in the first year, the state collected $23.65 million in tax revenue above the projected amount that was stated in the on the ballot and in the Blue Book in 2020. And so because this is above what was projected and what was technically approved by voters that year, the state is required to return those funds to nicotine and tobacco wholesalers and distributors. And so hence Proposition II, this is on the ballot to ask voters if the state should be allowed to retain that additional revenue, the $23.65 million, to put towards the state's universal preschool program, which was the original intent for those dollars from the increased sales tax. So if Proposition II passes, it's saying allow the state to retain that additional revenue to put towards universal preschool. If Proposition II does not pass, those funds will be returned to nicotine and tobacco wholesalers and distributors. So a recap here again, your yes vote says, let the state keep the funds to put towards universal preschool. A no vote says, let's refund the dollars to nicotine and tobacco wholesalers and distributors. And also, if II does not pass, the tax rate on those products, on nicotine and tobacco products, would be reduced by a total of 11.53% to match what was approved by voters in terms of the revenue. Okay, so that concludes my piece on the two different statewide ballot measures. I just want to share a couple of resources here and go over some key dates, and then I'll be handing it over to the folks at Education Foundation of Eagle County. So the first is This presentation was brought to you through the Count Me In initiative, as I explained at the beginning. If you visit countmeincolorado.org, you can view our complete ballot guide, which does go a little bit more in depth in each of these measures. Again, we don't take stances, but it's a great resource. And that is up on our website, along with a lot of other great ballot guides and voter resources. We also want to promote Just Vote Colorado as a great resource for all things voting information, a great space to look for your closest ballot drop boxes, your closest voter service and polling centers. You know, here in Colorado, we can start voting already. So some folks have already returned their ballot, but that's a great resource if you're looking for additional information. And of course, our Secretary of State's website has a lot of great resources. And just to go over some key dates, I know we're already approaching the election rapidly, but October 16th was kind of when ballots started to be mailed out to registered voters. So most people should have received that ballot in the mail. If you have not, I recommend going on the Secretary of State's website and you can track your ballot and see where it is. October 30th, which is coming up here pretty quickly, is when many of the voter service and polling centers will be open. This is also the last day that you can register online if you want to receive a ballot in the mail. So if you need to update your registration, you need to change your address, October 30th is the last day to do that if you still want to get a ballot in the mail. After that, you could still go vote or update your registration in person. And October 30th is the last recommended day for mailing back your ballot. So if you're not going to drop your ballot off at a drop box or polling center, you want to put it in the mail, we recommend October 30th as the last day to do that to ensure that it can make it to your county clerks by November 7th, which is election day. And just a reminder that in Colorado, there is no last day to register. So you can register to vote and vote up until 7 p.m. on November 7th. So it's not too late to register. It's certainly not too late to vote. And so I'll just leave us with this last slide. Again, there's the website, countmeincolorado.org. Find our ballot guide, all of our voting resources. And of course, if you're ever interested in being part of this type of initiative, we're always welcoming new partners in the work, new volunteers, so you can reach out to us on our website. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn it over to Wendy.
Thank you, Alex. That was incredible. Very concise. I'm Wendy Reimel, and this is Tessa Kirshner. We're with the Education Foundation of Eagle County, and the Education Foundation of Eagle County does a lot of advocacy work for our local school district here. And as part of that, we run campaigns when our school district puts critical initiatives on the ballot. And with that, we'd like to share a little bit about mill levy override and bond that are on the ballot in Eagle County this election, and we'll just dive right in.
So this year, on this ballot, November 7th, the school district has placed two initiatives on the ballot, 5A and 5B. 5A is a mill levy override. So that's going to go to people and things. So the mill levy override would raise about $3.5 million to go towards our retaining and attracting teachers and staff. And then some other various things, keeping our art, music, and technology and physical education program strong, support services for our mental health services for our kids. We know that that's a big, huge need. Maintaining our class sizes, and then helping with transportation and with some textbook and technology stuff.
One of the things that we know is that there's a national educator shortage, and we're feeling it here in Eagle County. And if we want to keep teachers here, this is one half of the piece of the pie with these two initiatives to retain and recruit. We just know how absolutely critical it is to have excellent educators in front of our kids. We know that that's the most impactful thing for kids, and this is it's beyond critical.
Yeah. We know that we all know this is a difficult community to live in with a high cost of living, and the district currently has about 10% vacancies across the board and their staff, which means critical shortages in our teachers and in our support staffs in our buildings. So the second part of this is 5B, which is the bond. Bond goes for buildings is kind of how to remember that. So the big piece of this initiative is to build and expand our pre-K facilities. So it would be building a early learning center down in Gypsum, and then expanding the capacity of the Edwards Early Learning Center. We all know as a community the shortage of preschool and daycare services for our county is critical. We currently have 350 people or children on the wait list for the schools services. And so we know that we need to get those kids taken care of if we can, and do what we can, our part, the district, to help our whole community with those, increasing those spots.
One of the questions that Tessa and I have received frequently is, you just talked about a teacher shortage. So how are you going to man a new building if there's a teacher shortage? One of the things that we really want our community to know and understand is that we have kids in modular trailers at Gypsum Elementary School and also at Red Hill Elementary School. And that the building, once we pass 5B and it is built, will already be around 3/4 full with teachers and students who are currently in trailers. So, so that's, I think, a really key point to understand, is that it won't be an empty building. It's already around 3/4 full with the capacity that our schools are serving in trailers.
And then by taking those preschool classrooms out of Gypsum Elementary and Red Hill and putting them into that new early learning center, then it frees up both of those schools to take those modulars away and serve the capacity that both of those schools currently have. So the rest of this bond goes, another big chunk goes towards employee housing. So the district has been working really hard for the last 10 years on the employee housing issue that we know is so critical throughout our community. Our latest big success was the opening of Miller Flats, which is the housing right next to Battle Mountain High School. We had 157 applicants for the 37 units that we had there. So we know that need is huge. So part of this money would be to build some more employee housing on that Gypsum site, and then also to help get started with some groundwork for the Malloy Park site that the district owns. We've been looking at that site for 20 years about what we can do and how to better utilize that piece of property. And we've come up with a pretty big and great plan to develop a small chunk of that Malloy Park property. So, and then the rest goes to safety and security, which we know that this continues to be a very, very important issue, especially from our staff members. We hear from our staff members directly their concerns about their own safety and the safety of our students. So that would be part of it. And then the last is to really make facility improvements. So we have ongoing facility needs and improvements that need to be made. And with the current budgets being so tight, really the only way to do that is to do that through the asking of a bond question.
One of the things that comes up with our educators on a regular basis is not, just salary, but also housing. So we see the bond and the mill as hand in glove with each other, because both of those things, especially in a state that pays our educators 50th in the nation, our teacher pay here in Colorado is 50th in terms of competitiveness across the nation. So we know that especially here in Eagle County, where it is expensive to live and difficult to find housing, that these two initiatives will make a huge difference in retaining the educators that we have and in hiring new staff.
I think Alex really portrayed the complexity of tax structure and funding in Colorado. And here in Eagle County, we we don't have a lot of hope for the state to fix that in any time soon. And so we really, as a community, have to look after our own and do what we can here to take care of our students and our teachers in our schools.
So what does this mean to the average taxpayer? When we look at $1 million home in 2023, we all know that we're going to pay more taxes. Property values here, especially in Eagle County, skyrocketed. So we look at $1 million home is now, let's say, worth on a 45% average increase, $1,450,000. So that,
Yeah, so
yeah.
if your home was worth $1 million in 2023, you know, now in 2024, it's going to be worth roughly $1.5 million. If 5A and 5B pass, the increase to you would be $170 for the year or $15 a month. So we recognize that these are tough times and that property owners are going to be facing some tough questions with the increase in the property taxes that they'll be paying. But we really feel that the ask of the school district, $170 per year or $15 per month, is a minimal investment in something, in a system that is so incredibly important to our community, taking care of our students and our teachers in our schools. I think we all saw when COVID hit how incredibly important our schools are to our community and the success of our community. And so we're just asking that people make this small investment to keep these things going and to keep taking care of our children, the most important asset of our community.
So we ask that you vote yes on 5A and 5B. I think the bigger challenge that we have is people turning in their ballots. It's just so important, in particular in an off-year election. So we're asking our community here in Eagle County for everyone to vote and to vote yes on 5A and 5B. Thank you for having us.